Hello, this is Eric. Today is the 18th of March, 2024, and here we are again with our History of Brazil exercises. To be honest with you, I was really missing these exercises, so I decided to refresh my memory with these beautiful exercises on the Getúlio Vargas era. And I selected 4 exercises here. The first of them say, with little money, but outside the revolutionary axis of the world, ignoring the Communist Manifesto and not wanting to be bourgeois, I naturally became a bohemian. I remained in the bourgeoisie, of which I was more than an ally. I was a cretin, sentimental, and poetic index. The valuation of coffee was an imperialist operation. The Brazilwood poetry was as well. That had to come down with the horns of the crisis. Just like almost all Brazilian avant-garde, provincial and suspicious literature, if not extremely exhausted and reactionary, collapsed. The text by Oswald de Andrade, which was a Brazilian poet at the time of Getúlio Vargas. And then we have here the alternatives. Let me activate my pen here. Let's check out which of these alternatives are correct. Exposes the author's desire for literature and other artistic forms to be controlled by the state and thus escape the tutelage of the hegemonic social class. No, you don't read about control. No way. So this one is definitely incorrect. Reveals some of the main characteristics of the modernist movement of 1922, such as the search for national identity and adherence to right-wing political party projects. Right-wing, yes, but not really adherence to right-wing political party projects, because that was not the motto, the objective of the modernist movement of 1922. So this is also wrong. And again, yes, it had some inclination towards a right-wing political project, but it was not in search of adherence to right-wing projects. The modernist movement of 1922 aimed at creating an authentic Brazilian artwork, right? Poetry and music and everything related to art. They wanted to halt all the European, the purely European influence, and especially they wanted to put an end to Parnasianism, right? So it was not really a political project, okay? C, indicates a gradual distancing of the participants of the Modern Art Week from the left-wing ideological components that characterize the movement. Distancing from the left wing, no, they never had any approximation with the left-wing ideological components. So this one is wrong. Explains the concern of the dominant political and social sectors in the face of the economic crisis caused by the rise in the price of coffee and their attempt to regulate the sector. On the contrary, the price of coffee dropped by the time of Getúlio Vargas, because Getúlio Vargas was pretty much at industrialization of the country. So alternative E is the correct one, and it says, demonstrates the author's defense to the politicization of literary production and the abandonment of part of the aesthetic principles that guided his work in the previous decades. Yes, because in the previous decades, Oswald de Andrade was pretty much in tune with Parnasianism and other aesthetic principles that had nothing to do with the literary production ideals at the time of the modernist movement, right? So yes, that is basically the one that best grasps the idea of the goal behind the modernist movement, which is pretty much described here in this small and complex, it is pretty much described here in this small and complex text, right? Question 2. On November 10th, 1937, Getúlio Vargas, through a speech on the national radio, launched a manifesto to the nation, in which he said that it was necessary to readjust the political organism to the economic needs of the country. It was the beginning of the new state, a political regime that would remain in force until 1945 in Brazil. Consider the following statements. So let's see, we have here the options, correct. So let's see which statements are correct. 1. The adoption of a policy of state interventionism, refuting the liberal principles previously applied in the economy, such as free competition or private initiative, made it possible for the state to act to boost the basic industry sector with the creation of the Companhia Siderúrgica Nacional in Volta Redonda. Let's see it again. The adoption of a policy of state interventionism. That's perfect. Interventionism was the word of the day at the time, right? So refuting the liberal principles, no liberal principles. And that's the very fact that is going to complicate things to Getúlio later on, because he pretty much aligned with totalitarianism, but at the same time he fought, right, against totalitarians, right? So this one is definitely right. 2, in the petroleum sector, the achievements of the new regime were of paramount importance because with the creation of Petrobras, a state monopoly in the extraction of oil and mineral reserves, important elements in the industrialization process was guaranteed. It is perfect, but there is just one problem here. The creation of Petrobras took place in the second government of Getúlio after 1945. So the period is not the same. So this one, the first one is right, and this one is wrong. Let's check out now statement 3. The Companhia Siderúrgica Nacional was created, actually Companhia Siderúrgica, right? Let me correct it here. Companhia Siderúrgica Nacional was created by Vargas after a diplomatic agreement between the Brazilian and U.S. governments, which provided for the construction of a steel mill capable of supplying steel to the Allies during World War II and in peace helping in the development of Brazil. It is perfect because the U.S. government was already drawing nearer and nearer Brazil. They wanted a position in Brazil so that they would be better able to attack Africa. They had some issues there at the time, so they negotiated a position to have a steel mill structure there in the northeastern area of Brazil, in Natal, more specifically saying. And in exchange for that, they received investment. Brazil, through Vargas, received investment from the U.S. government, right? And as a consequence, they were also, Brazil was also able to supply steel to the Allies during World War II. And in peace, because Brazil didn't really receive attacks, right? Yes, it might have happened, but it was not really an involvement, a direct involvement with the war. You know, Brazil didn't have this direct involvement with the war, with the World War II, except for sending soldiers and for supplying steel to the Allies and some isolated cases of attacks by the Germans, right? So in general peace, they helped, there was this help to develop Brazil. So in this case, we have statement 3 correct. So 1 and 3, this is alternative D as a correct one for us. Question 3. The governor of Minas Gerais, Antônio Carlos, is credited with a phrase that symbolizes a tension that existed in Brazil in 1930. Check out this picture here from the time that Getúlio Vargas assumed power in Brazil as the president, right, after the revolution. And the reading goes on and says, "Let's make the revolution before the people make it." Such a show of concern on the part of the elites of the Liberal Alliance shows that they were aware that it was necessary to act to take political control and contain popular dissatisfaction. Regarding the revolution of 1930, as the photo of the time illustrates, it is correct to say that. Let's see here. The ascension of Getúlio Vargas from Rio Grande do Sul as a new president represented the alliance of the old oligarchies and also of the urban social sectors and lieutenants, apparently victorious with the armed forces. The commitment between these groups was to maintain the economic and political system of the previous governments with the support of the armed forces. Not really, right? Not really. The ascension of Getúlio Vargas from Rio Grande do Sul as a new president represented the alliance of the old oligarchies and also of the urban social sectors and lieutenants. No, not old oligarchies. Yes, urban social sectors and lieutenants against the old oligarchies. So this one is wrong. The revolution of 1930 cannot be considered a decisive rupture in the history of the country. No, it was a decisive rupture. We had now women voting. We have many changes that took place in Brazil with the revolution of 1930. So I don't even need to read the rest because we already see a mistake here. Those who took power with the revolution of 1930 sought in every way to create the image of a totally different Brazil from the uprising. We can consider this political episode as a victory of the industrial bourgeoisie over the traditional coffee oligarchies and that the armed forces would promote integration and national unity. We have some mistakes here, right? Yes, they wanted to create the image of a totally different Brazil, not the oligarchy Brazil, right? The coffee oligarchy Brazil. We can consider this political episode as a victory of the industrial bourgeoisie. No, there was not an industrial bourgeoisie actually at the time. Over the traditional coffee oligarchies, yes, and that the armed forces would promote integration and national unity. No, not really. Yes, we didn't have armed forces actually at the time. We had an incipient army, let's say, and lieutenants, and we had, besides the lieutenants, we had some colonels, right? So we didn't really have all this structure that is mentioned here in Alternative C. So this is also wrong. The defeat of Getúlio Prestes, no way. Getúlio Prestes was elected. And that was the very reason why all the other states got fed up with São Paulo. So this is wrong. Upon assuming the political command of the nation shortly after the 1930 movement, Getúlio Vargas released images wearing a military uniform, influencing public opinion that under his leadership a new period of combating the evils of the old republic and in favor of order and progress began. Perfect. This is the correct alternative. That's why you see here that he is wearing this military uniform. Okay? And finally, our last question. Luiz Carlos Prestes founded in 1935 the National Liberation Alliance, a front of opposition to fascism and imperialism, which confronted internally with the organization created by writer Plínio Salgado, the Brazilian integralist action of declared fascist inspiration, whose political program proposed the fight against communism, yes, the extraction of political parties, yes, they wanted to be absolute, they were totalitarians, extreme nationalists, yes, And the supervision of artistic activities. Yes, this one is perfect. We don't even need to read the rest of them. Okay? Well, I hope you have enjoyed these exercises on the Getúlio Vargas era in Brazil. And I hope to see you in future videos on the history of Brazil. Okay? Bye-bye.